So, not the phony weather balloon story that General Ramey concocted on July 8th. Young Jesse Marcel was most curious about what he described as metallic pinkish purple hieroglyphs or symbols that ran along the entire length of a dark tan-colored I-beam only 3/8 of an inch wide. The I-beam was so lightweight that Jesse Jr. said he could hardly feel it in his hand, resting. It was like holding air. Plastics did not exist publicly in 1947, but later on, eyewitnesses would say the I-beams were similar to lightweight plastic or balsa wood. There were rumors that scientists had discovered the I-beams were an exotic hybrid of something like metal and something like wood blended together. It could not be cut or burned. Intelligence officer Jesse Marcel Sr. would himself compare the strange pink-purple symbols to, quote, indecipherable Chinese writing, close quote. Now we know that 12 years after the Roswell UFO cover-up began, that Brigadier General Stephen Lufkin was briefed at the Pentagon in 1959 about the Roswell UFO crashes and was shown thin I-beams with what he called purplish, quote, encryptions, close quote. Well, an encryption, that means encoding messages or information in such a way that only authorized parties can read it. Another source, Steve Lytle, reported that his mathematician father was asked by government authorities to, quote, decipher the I-beam symbols, close quote. They tried, but no one was able to. And those were not the only mysterious symbols to show up on UFOs. In 1803, on the east coast of Japan in the Hitachi province, now known as Ibaraki, fishermen reported that a pale, red-headed, alien-looking woman suddenly emerged from underneath the ocean waters in a round craft that had symbols on it, and people wrote them down. The woman was inside the craft, clutching a box. Utsuro Bune means ship hole, because her sea craft was shaped like a rice bowl. People who saw the craft said the top was like glass or crystal. When the red-haired woman spoke, it was in a language that no Japanese person had ever heard before. What language was she speaking? Where did she come from? What was in the box? Nobody ever learned. And what makes things even weirder is that back in 1803, the same woman, the same description, the same craft were reported to have been seen in other parts of Japan, and she was always still tightly holding the box. 177 years later, on December 26, 1980, after midnight, Staff Sergeant James Pennison at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge in England would also encounter a strange craft with symbols, not on water, but in Rendlesham Forest. When Jim dragged his fingers over the symbols, his mind was filled with zeros and ones. Zeros and ones, binary code. And he had telepathic impressions simultaneously with the zeros and ones coming into his mind that this was a time machine from a distant future where an advanced civilization was dying out. Its mission was to harvest genetic material from Earth to use as, quote, band-aids, close quote, to extend the future civilization survival. There was no pilot. The triangular craft operated with alien self-activating software. Here is a comparison of two of the Bune. Here is what was written down, interpretation of her craft. Here is a triangle with one circle here, a little larger to show there. So I'm marking here to here. Here is the second with the two circles up here. Utsurobuni, 1830. Rendlesham Forest, Jim Penniston, December 26th, 1980. And we're going to see the triangle circle symbol again in a current 2015 case. But before then, here is a comparison also of what happened in August 28, 1991, 11 years after Sergeant Penniston touched the symbols on the alien craft in Rendlesham Forest. Soviet authorities were tracking a UFO on a zigzag course over the Aral Sea at 4,225 miles an hour, 6,800 kilometers an hour. The rapid radar track vanished over Kyrgyzstan. A year later, in June 1992, it took that long for a search party to get to and find a cylinder-shaped craft with strange green symbols on its surface. The investigators reported, quote, a powerful electromagnetic field emanating from the wreckage, close quote. All photographs and videotape recordings were overexposed, destroyed. The craft had crashed in the Shaitan Mazar Gorge, also known as the Devil's Grave, in the central Tian Shan Mountains of eastern Kyrgyzstan. And then 14 years after that, an Army sergeant with his wife, two young children, dog and cat, began moving from Hunter Army Airfield to Fort Carson in Colorado Springs, planning to go through Atlanta. The husband, Sergeant C.J., and his wife were shocked when a bright white light in the sky suddenly came down toward their truck. The Army sergeant estimated that the disc hovering above their truck in Wadley, Georgia was 820 feet long. He was that precise, he said, because he did this for a living in the Army, estimating sizes, distinctions, and shapes on aerial vehicles in the sky. 820 feet wide, and that's nearly 3 football fields. That's big. And nearly 200 feet in from vertical to bottom. That there were bright white. He said he wasn't able to depict with white, so he did it with yellow. And he said, I didn't know how to do it. He said, my drawing's wrong, I admit it. He said, because what we were seeing in the sky, it looked like this, Linda. It was white, but there was space in here, the night sky. He said, I've never seen anything like it, and I still don't understand it. This is there, and this bright light is projecting, and it had motion to it, but it was not coming from the physical craft to his eyes. It was projected in the front and projected in the back, and he didn't understand, but he said, I just drew the pieces of what we were seeing, not understanding the projection. And he said you'd have to have a bigger piece of paper to show how far the strange pulsing light was front and back of this craft. And below the midline were 5 dark symbols. CJ's wife, who I have talked to for about an hour, she was very upset by all of this. She doesn't want to speak publicly at all, but it was very good to be able to hear both of them talk to me about their interactions. This is her interpretation with her husband helping her. Everybody sees things differently. But the thing that was striking, and you don't see it here in the projection, these are subtle colors. She said it looked the way sun shining on an oil slick, the way it will have that rainbow reflection. She said that is the way this appeared, like the oil slick rainbow reflection in sunlight, but it's dark night, and it had a dim glow to it. Now she saw this as round lights. And she was particularly almost mesmerized by these round lights. Her husband, on the other hand, he thought that they were more rectangle like this, and he thought they were inset with dimension from the surface. And remember, in his work in the Army, one of his jobs is to see things in the sky and be able to retell and sketch details. This shows why eyewitness testimony singularly is not very reliable, but between the two, we get even more rich details. The appearance of this craft, according to CJ, the sergeant, when it was over, he looked at his digital watch on his wrist, and he recalls that it's had 1:29 a.m. He thinks that everything happening over the road was no more than 5 minutes. But he's the first to admit that time was so chopped up and so weird, and everything that happened that night was so strange. It's extraordinary what is behind this case and how some of it actually resonates with the two speakers before me. All I can do right now, because I'm telling an arc of a story, is to share with you that something with symbols in which, look at this symbol and look at this symbol, and now we're going. Here's Jim Peniston, December 26, 1980, June 29th, 2015. Jim has two circles on a ring, I'll call it, around a triangle. This has a ring, a triangle, and three. The orientation is very similar. Sergeant CJ and his wife were so confused about what happened and how their GPS could have diverted them to Wadley, away from their Colorado Springs route via Atlanta, which would usually have only been a 4.5-hour drive from Savannah. They started out at approximately, he thinks, somewhere 6:30, 7:30, 8:30, that they never expected that they would be anywhere but Atlanta by midnight. But the night of this high strangeness UFO, they did not get to Atlanta until after sunup, around 7:30 in the morning on June 29th. And I have all of the receipts from where they left near Hunter Airfield all through the trip. I have all of the receipts getting to Colorado Springs, and you can track how strange this all is. And then the next night on June 30th at a Motel 6 in Kentucky, Sergeant CJ found himself waking up in their motel bathroom with, this is the back of the motel receipt. He has that in his left hand. In his right hand, he has his ball